Hi everyone. In this video we will look at the worst of humanity. As we progress, the stories are going to get more disturbing, saddening, and even distressing. I won't be breaking terms of service, hopefully. This won't be anything that isn't allowed on YouTube, but if you feel you might be distressed by some dark human themes, then maybe this isn't the best video for you. Check the bio for a selection of others. However, if you are one of the ones who have stayed, please welcome my guest, Mr. Revenant, as we dive into Humans Are the Worst, Part 3. Please like, comment, share, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Here's the bells. This is an experience that I had that frankly may have ruined my life. It was something so simple, and it wasn't even my fault. It all started one morning while I was waiting for my usual bus to arrive. I had recently started working for a well-known and respected company in my town, and I was proud of my new job. I was a young guy, aged 21, and I was eager to carve out a career for myself. As I was waiting for the bus to arrive, a mother and her daughter walked up and stood close by. The girl was about 4 or 5 years old, and she was clutching what looked like a violin case to her chest. Looks like she's on her way to a lesson, I thought. I then began to overhear their conversation. "I've told you, Mummy can't go with you today. But I'll be there to pick you up later, okay?" "No, I want Mummy to go with me," the little girl says. "No, you have to go by yourself today, okay?" "I can't do it," the little girl replies, sharply. "Yes, you can. Whenever you hear the name of this stop, Fujigaoka, you can get off and go to your lesson. Fujigaoka, okay? You just ring the bell and the driver will stop. You can do it." The mother was getting a little impatient at that point, I felt. I was stood facing the road waiting for the bus, so I turned to take a look at them. I noticed that the little girl was on the verge of tears. Me turning to face them turned out to be a massive mistake on my part, because as soon as I looked their way, the mother seemed to lock eyes with me, and then she said, "Oh, excuse me, are you going past Fujigaoka? Could you do me a favor and ring the bell and make sure she gets off?" The bus just pulled in at that point and was beginning to open its doors. I did what I thought would be a nice thing to do, and I said, "Of course, I'll help." "Hey, look, your big brother's here and he's gonna ride the bus with you. Isn't that great?" she said to her daughter. When her mother said that, the little girl stopped crying and smiled and grabbed my hand. I thought this would be my good deed for the day. Who could deny this simple request? I thought it would all be fine, but you know as well as I do that I wouldn't be sharing my story here if things turned out fine. We climbed the steps and got a seat. The little girl sat next to me and chatted away endlessly. She told me all about her school and her friends and what she likes and dislikes. I, of course, smiled and nodded and asked her little questions of my own. I had had worse rides to work in the morning, let me tell you, so this was a breath of fresh air. Eventually we approached Fujigaoka, and I rang the bell to alert the bus driver. She somehow looked a little sad because I could tell she was enjoying telling me all about her little world. In all honesty, this was the one just before my regular stop. So I asked the little girl, "Are you okay to get off here and get to your class by yourself? Like Mummy said." And then it suddenly dawned on her that she was about to be alone again as the bus slowed to a stop. Her bottom lip started wobbling, and she began to start whining and forcing tears out from the corners of her eyes. I really didn't want her to make a scene, so I decided to get off the bus and walk with her. I remembered that her mother said it was only about a 5-minute walk. I would still get to work just on time if I took her to her lesson, so I thought I would just do the decent thing. So the little girl took my hand and we left. She stopped her whining and crying almost instantly. She went straight back to telling me all about her little world. About 3 minutes into our walk, we passed a police officer on a bicycle. He took a very sharp glance at me. In that moment, I realized that I might have looked a little suspicious to him. A young man in a suit holding the hand of a little girl. And I have a baby face, plus if you couple that with the fact that I was 21 and she was about 4 or 5, something about the maths there doesn't seem to add up, I suppose, and I think that's why he took interest in us. She was pulling at my hand in parts as well, so I guess without the context of what I was asked to do at the bus stop, I could be seen as suspicious looking. It didn't look like I was an older sibling either, nor her father. We really didn't look alike at all. Without giving too much away, I have slightly darker skin, and genetically I feel that her family might have been a little bigger than my family, and that's all I want to say. He was riding in the opposite direction, and I thought that he was just going to leave us alone. He'd just take a look and keep going, but when I heard the screech of bicycle brakes behind me, I knew he had turned around and come back. I then felt a tap on my shoulder, and a voice asked, "Can I have a quick word with you?" I guess you can figure out what that means when an officer asks to have a talk with you. It's never great, is it? The little girl began to cry and wail again, as we were both asked to go with the officer back to his station. The officer didn't seem that interested at all in how upset she was. It wasn't nice to know that the little girl was missing her violin lesson. She probably thought that she was going to be in a lot of trouble. We entered the local police station, and we were taken into a room at the back. I guess that they used that room for their interrogations. I was so flustered that I was doing a really terrible job of explaining the situation too. The officer took a look at my laptop bag and clocked my new company's name on it, and decided to pause our interview to contact them. I think he did this because maybe he didn't believe that I was an employee at that company. He might have thought that it was an accessory or something that I would use to make the child trust me. Had he asked me, I could have showed my ID. It's so frustrating thinking back on it. I told the officer my story, and the little girl agreed with me. He wasn't buying it, and there was an awful lot of back and forth. I was really nervous because on top of all that was happening, I was now late for work at my new job. Ultimately, my innocence was proven by the violin teacher. She contacted the girl's mum, the lady I met at the bus stop, and she confirmed my story. After I was released, and I got to work, I was ordered to see the head of my department. I explained it all, and he was very sympathetic, actually. I went home that night feeling exhausted and having mixed feelings about the day. I felt embarrassed, most of all. I went back to work the following morning, and over the course of a couple of days, rumors about me were being spread behind my back at work. I was famous as the newbie who got busted in a kidnapping attempt. These employees which were spreading these rumors were saying that I was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping a young girl. Because I was new, some of the employees who had been there for a long time felt comfortable enough to tease me. I tried to join in, to kind of laugh it off, so they knew it wasn't going to hurt me, but that ended up making me feel really uncomfortable. Every hour of the day, someone had a jibe at me. I began to resent the company I worked so hard to get into. They would joke at me as soon as I came into the room, behind cupped hands as I walked past, and they would leave nasty post-it notes on my computer at work. It was like as soon as some of the senior staff said something and started laughing at me, the junior members of staff used it as an opportunity to buddy up to their bosses by joining in, and they would take it further than the seniors in an attempt to be recognized. No one cared about how it was affecting me, and my confidence was shot, my self-esteem was on the floor, and I hated it. But do you know what I hated the most? I hated the way the female employees looked at me. They looked at me like I was some kind of predator or something. They wouldn't make eye contact with me, and kept their interactions with me as short as humanly possible. Honestly, those looks that they gave me, they made me feel so dirty and so ashamed. Co-workers that I had gotten along with well were now trying to avoid me, like I was carrying some kind of disease or something. I was innocent, and it was proven, yet I was still being treated like I was this evil kidnapper. I couldn't stand it. I tried to ride out the storm because I truly wanted a career at that company. But when all the jibes and the bullying didn't stop for close to 5 months, I decided that enough was enough. I threw in the towel and I quit. No one cared that I quit. They just made sure that they got in as many insults as they could before I worked my notice period. Now I guess this is the part where I tell you my thoughts after the fact, like a kind of afterword in a book or at the end of some novel. I believe that the mother I met that day is a decent person, but she did a bad thing. She had terrible judgment skills. I don't think she should be asking strangers to take her daughter on a bus ride. She actually reached out to me after getting my details from the police to make an apology, and that's why I think I can say she's learned her lesson on putting her daughter in strangers' hands. I hope she realizes that it could have been a lot worse if I was in fact the type of person that my co-workers were making me out to be. I also don't think a girl of her daughter's age should be riding the bus alone. I myself never rode the bus alone until I was about 10, and I know some parents who probably wouldn't be all that okay with that either. At the end of the day, the police's job is to investigate suspicious people. Had I been an actual kidnapper, then that officer would have been doing a great job by detaining me. I don't hate that he took us in for questioning because I want the streets to be safe. I wish that he didn't contact my company though. Now for my co-workers. I hate them for how they made me feel, and how they made me give up a career that I really wanted. They are the worst, and they knew that I was innocent, but they still continued. Things just went really off track that day. But would I do it again to help? Maybe. I'm not so sure now. I guess my confidence has been knocked and my faith in humanity shaken a little, but I must be a glutton for punishment. Because I don't think I can just stand by and ignore a request for help. Overall, I have mixed feelings, but I guess it's as they say. No good deed goes unpunished, right?
My parents divorced when I was in kindergarten. It was a rough patch of my life, but I won't bore you with the details. Skipping over to something that I can tell you, I ended up living with my dad when I was in elementary school. We lived in an apartment. My dad wasn't rich, and neither was his family, but I would say we were not poor. I felt like I had a normal lifestyle. This happened when I was in the 6th grade of elementary school, about 11 years old. After school, I had volleyball practice, and after that, I usually walked home. I'm a female, by the way. Usually, a friend walked home with me, but that day, I think she was out sick. I had to walk alone. I left school that day at around 5 p.m. It was a little later than usual for me. Since it was winter, it was already dark out. It was about a 25-minute walk from our home to school, and because we lived in a rural area, there weren't all that many street lights. I was scared of walking home alone at that age, so I just tried to go as fast as I could. Even though I was a little tired from practice, I felt as if I was keeping a decent pace. About 5 minutes into my route, I noticed that there was a guy in his 30s walking behind me. It wouldn't ever feel like a big deal if it was the middle of the day, but since it was dark and I was alone, I was nervous. My heart was pounding. What if I get abducted, like in the news? I wondered. Feeling paranoid, I upped my pace. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but it felt like when I sped up, so did he. In my rural town, I didn't really notice all that many people on the street after dark. Everyone would usually be at home relaxing when it was dark out. Well, that's how I saw it. Therefore, if something happened to me, no one would be around to help me or even see it. The more I allowed those frightening thoughts to enter my mind, the faster my legs moved. At this point in my walk, I was nearing home, but I stopped at a red light opposite my street. I decided to use that opportunity to check behind me. The guy who I thought was following me wasn't there anymore. I was relieved, and I assumed that maybe I was overthinking things. I slowed my pace down to my usual walking speed. I crossed the road and turned towards our apartment, and then I looked back, just to check. The man I thought that had been following me was back, and when I saw him, I got goosebumps. I got so freaked out by seeing that guy again, I broke out into a sprint. I ran upstairs to our floor and quickly scrambled to get my keys out from my bag. I quickly unlocked the door and rushed inside. We lived on the second floor. I ran into my bedroom and I opened the curtains a bit to see outside. The man from before was stood outside on the street, staring up at me. I was so scared that something terrible was going to happen that I couldn't bring myself to take my eyes off of the man. I didn't know what to do, so I just stared at him, and eventually, he slowly walked away from our building. About 2 hours after the man left, my dad came home from work. I so wanted to tell him about what happened, but I didn't want to worry him. He always looked like he was under a lot of pressure and was wrought with stress, so I did not tell him. About a month went by, and I often thought about that day, but nothing else happened or changed in my life to make me feel worried. However, about 2 months after that day, on a Sunday morning, at around 8 a.m., someone rang our buzzer. My dad was getting ready for work, so I went over to the door and looked through the peephole. There were 2 men wearing suits stood out there. I called out to them and asked who they were through the closed door. One of the men replied and said they were from City Hall, so naturally I opened the door. As soon as I opened the door, one of the men stuck his foot between the gap, which stopped me from closing it. I was really scared by that. Then one of them said, "We need to have a little bit of a difficult discussion with your dad. Is he here?" I didn't know what else to do, so I called for my dad. When my dad came to the door, it looked as if he recognized these 2 men. He then turned to me and said, "Go wait in the kitchen." My dad's mood changed in a matter of seconds after seeing those 2 men. I wanted to know who they were and why they had to talk to him about something difficult. I wanted to know what was going on. I decided to hang out in the hall just around the corner from the front door. I wanted to listen in and find out more. I think my dad must have noticed that I hadn't made it to the kitchen and I was still in the hall, because he said to the 2 men, "Gentlemen, should we talk outside?" They headed out and my dad followed and then shut the door. They talked out there for about an hour or so, and I couldn't hear a word of their conversation. When my dad came back inside, he was quiet, so I asked him about the 2 men. "Were those guys from City Hall?" And he replied, "It's not a big deal, it's fine, okay?" That seemed to be the end of it. He did not want to entertain the topic of the 2 strange men at the door with me again after that. 3 days later, I woke up in the morning for school as usual. I expected to see my dad rushing around getting ready for work like every other day, but our home was quiet. In fact, I could not hear him at all. I got out of bed and called out to him, but no one replied. I guessed that he'd already left for work, so I didn't think much of it. I got ready myself and headed out to school. I came home from school like normal and hung around waiting for him to get home. 1 hour after he normally came home passed, then 2 hours, and then 3. He still wasn't home. It was about 9 p.m. when I decided to look in the fridge for something to eat for dinner. I didn't really know what to do after I had my poor excuse of a dinner, so I just went to bed at my usual time and just hoped that things would be back to normal in the morning. When I woke up the following morning, I already knew before I got out of bed that my dad wasn't home yet. I could just tell. The apartment was really quiet and still. I remember it was a Saturday and there was no school. I woke up really early that morning. Usually I like to sleep in on the weekend, but I couldn't rest easy. I did not know where my dad was. I got a call at about 7 a.m. It was from my aunt, my father's brother's wife. All she said to me was, "Are you okay? I'm coming to pick you up now, okay?" And after about 30 minutes, she was here ringing the buzzer at the door. She told me to pack the things I needed for school and some clothes. I had no idea what was going on, so I just did as she asked. After I finished packing, she told me that I would be staying at her place that night, and I got into the car with her and we drove away. When I got to her place, I saw my uncle sat with a glass of whiskey, looking very serious. He was a bald man, and if my dad lost all his hair, he would look nearly identical. He did not mince his words. He just said, "You'll be staying at my house from now on. Sorry, but your dad's not coming home anymore. You'll have to go to school from here." I was tearful and obviously upset. I remember asking him why, again and again, and then he finally told me, "Looks like your dad was in a lot of debt." So after a few days, weeks, and months, I managed to figure out that my father left me in the night, or was possibly taken away from me by debt collectors. I'm sure that the man who followed me home from school that day was a debt collector, and those 2 shady men who came to the door and said they were from City Hall were debt collectors too. This all happened a long time ago. I haven't seen my father in 15 years. I feel many different feelings about everything, and I'm not sure how to express how I feel sometimes. I have since heard a rumor that my father is now disabled and living in an institution, but it's just a rumor, I guess. Even if I knew where to find him, I'm not sure if I'd want to go and find him. I usually read scary stories online, and I just wanted to share my scary experience because my dad disappeared in the middle of the night when I was in elementary school, and I don't think I've ever been able to get over it.
I've lived a hard life. It's been all wrong from the start. I just want to get some stuff off my chest. First off, I was bullied at school. Every day was horrible, and the bullying didn't end until I finished high school. Every day I went to school, I was hoping that things would be different. And I always tried to do something different because I was obviously not popular with the kids at my school and they didn't like me. But no matter what I tried, all my efforts were in vain. I tried to focus on my studies because of all the bullies, and I didn't even do that well at school. It was like I had nothing going for me. By the time job hunting season came around, I applied for lots of jobs, hoping that one of the big companies in my area would take a chance on me and hire me. All I ever received in response to my applications were well wishes. You know, the kind of thanks but no thanks email. I hate the part that said, "We wish you the best of luck," because I was starting to realize at that age that I had never experienced any luck. I wished that they'd just hire me instead of wishing for my future. Finally, after a long string of rejection letters, I managed to find a company that was interested in hiring me. I did a little research into that company, and they had a reputation of being shady and undesirable. But I felt as if I had little other options. I just wanted to work. I knew that if I had a job, then I could buy things. I could sort myself out. I could be different. Well, my career didn't start off in the greatest manner. My boss took his life within a week after I started work there. Even though we had only worked together for a week, I thought of him as a really kind man. He exercised a great deal of patience with me and made sure that I understood everything he taught me. He had grey hair, and it was noticeable that he hadn't been sleeping well, if at all. I quickly understood that the work was incredibly demanding and exhausting. People kept coming and going in our company. I really didn't like it there, so I was thinking of looking for a new job. I started to have difficulty sleeping too. I couldn't really ever find the time to apply for other jobs, let alone attend interviews, so I stuck with it for a while, until one day I had a breakdown, and I just walked into my boss's office and quit right there on the spot. I probably shouldn't have done that because I was living paycheck to paycheck at the time. I had nothing saved. I was at a complete loss after I quit my job. I needed to get a job and quick, otherwise I would lose my shitty tiny apartment. Isn't life cruel? I was approached one night by some guy on the street. I guess he must have spotted something about me, some kind of desperation. He asked if I wanted a job, and my interest was piqued. How did he know? The job he offered me was in adult entertainment, shall we say. All I had to do was recruit women to join our industry. It seemed pretty straightforward, and, let's be fair, an easier job than my last one. I figured that I didn't really have all that much to lose. The cherry on the icing on the cake was the fact that I could probably spend my days surrounded by beautiful women, and that couldn't be that bad, could it? My job was a little different than expected. I was basically trying to recruit women into shady nighttime activities. I guess I shouldn't go much further than that, but yeah, it's probably what you're thinking. The Mizu Shobai. If you know, you know. Red light district stuff. Whenever I approached women on the street to recruit them, I was almost always ignored. They would walk right on by me, trying their best not to see me or hear me. That wasn't great because the job was kind of performance-based. I really only got paid when I brought women into our line of work. So in a desperate effort to make ends meet and get some sign-ups, I would take to shouting and pleading with these women, and of course that didn't work. It only drove them further away. I realized that most of the men who did well in this line of work were handsome guys. The reason that I wasn't doing so well was because I wasn't very good looking. I had always thought of myself as ugly, and I'm pretty sure that's why I got bullied at school. It seemed like, at that point in my life, all of my bad luck and everyone's dislike towards me could be blamed on my looks. So I did something to change it. I decided to take out a loan to get plastic surgery. I know it probably sounds a bit rash, but as you might be able to guess at this point, I wasn't really thinking and behaving rationally back then. After my surgery, I managed to get more sign-ups. They really sorted my eye area out. They made them look bigger, which I couldn't believe would be possible. I was getting money, but as soon as I had it, the debt that I racked up was swallowing it. Over the course of some years, I suddenly realized that I was an old man now. I had had so much work done over the years that I couldn't really recognize my own face in the mirror anymore. The surgeons always said that this was the look that women liked and it would always help me, but I never married. I never had a girlfriend. And on the day that my dawning realization came, I remembered my old face, my ugly old face, and although I didn't like it, it was my face. I didn't think I looked all that handsome with all this work on my face. It was very sad to suddenly realize that because all I ever wanted to be was liked. I'd put so much money into plastic surgery that I hadn't really been all that interested in the true cost of things. I realized that I would never be able to pay off the debts that I created, so one night I decided to run away from all my problems. Meanwhile, all my school classmates who had bullied me had gone on to live rich, fulfilling lifestyles. They had gotten married and become bosses. It just wasn't fair. As for myself, I lived a life of shame, running from debts, and the knowledge that I'd built a career on poaching women for the red light district. And I knew that some of the women that I had recruited had ended their lives. I brought them to that world, and I had a hand in those final actions. Knowing that has left a dark shadow in my heart. Bullying isn't right, but it happens, and I've come to the realization that it cannot really be used to justify my life choices. I've only brought more misery into the world. I should have done something more positive with my life. I lost the will to live at that point. I didn't think there was any point going on. Before I signed off for good in life, I wanted to go abroad at least once. It was a long-held dream of mine. So with the remaining money I had through loans and other ill-gotten ways, I bought a ticket to India. I picked India partially because the ticket price was so low at the time, but I always thought it was a beautiful country. It wasn't long after I landed in India that I got sick. I mean really sick. I was passing red, and I had a horrible fever. And that takes you to about now. I guess that I won't make it out of here. I don't mind though. I didn't write this because I want to be known or liked or get some kind of sympathy. It's far too late for any of that. It won't make a difference now. However, if any of those women are living, and it wasn't just rumors that they took their own lives, then I want to express my sincere regret for my life choices. I want to extend this apology out to anyone whose lives have been negatively affected just by knowing me. I don't know how many lives I might have ruined. I'm sorry. But I'll be honest with you. I never thought that trying to live would be this hard.
This happened when I was in the 3rd grade of elementary school. I think it wasn't long after I turned 8 years old. My family and I were all out on a drive one weekend afternoon. It was a bright and sunny day. I remember we were going to see our cousins, and I was really looking forward to it. We didn't end up making it to our destination that day. We got into a car crash, a really bad one. An oncoming car in the opposite lane had swerved over the central line and came into our lane. The car hit us head on, and our car was smashed backwards into the border at the side of the road. We were out in the sticks in the mountains. We were hit with such force that we crashed beyond the guardrail, and we ended up rear-ending the rocky outcrops of a mountain we were passing under. I looked up to see that my mother, who was driving, was slumped forward in her chair. Her arms hung motionlessly at her sides. She was still in her chair. My grandma was in the back, and when we finally came to a stop, she had her head against the back of the driver's seat. She wasn't moving. My sister was also in the car. She was lying face down in the footwell of the back seats. She was lying in an awkward position, and she wasn't moving. As for me, I insisted on riding shotgun, so I was in the passenger seat. The first thing I felt was pain in my leg. It was like my leg was stuck at a weird angle, and I couldn't move it. I looked forward towards the front of the car. The hood was completely destroyed. Black smoke was billowing out from the crumpled metal. The windshield was smashed. and the cracks in the glass made it look like the biggest spider web ever to me at that age. There was blood inside of the car, a lot of it. I could see it, smell it, and it felt as if I could almost taste it. I wasn't sure if I was bleeding at that point. As I said, at the start, we crashed on a mountain road. There were numerous cars passing by as it wasn't exactly a quiet road. It wasn't the kind of road with a sidewalk. There was no place for people to walk by the side of the road. There weren't even houses in the area. It was a stretch of the highway. Cars were passing by. I didn't know what to do apart from call out for help. I was really panicking, as you can probably imagine, because I seemed to be the only one in the car who was conscious. Fear was beating me down in those moments. I think I wasn't even shouting words. I was just trying to make as much noise as possible in the hopes that someone would hear. I was so scared, but even though I was utterly terrified, there was one thing about the crash that day that scared me more. The scariest thing about it all was the fact that no one pulled over to see if we were okay. No one stopped. I cannot forget the faces I saw through the blood-stained shattered glass. They just stared. I know that some of them must have heard me screaming because they slowed down and wound their windows down. These people passing along the highway just looked our way with half interest or morbid curiosity. Why didn't they stop to see if we were okay? I just can't understand it. They didn't care. They just left us there while the smoke got blacker and blacker. I felt salty tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I felt so helpless. In the car, no one was showing any signs of waking up, and I couldn't move. My leg hurt at first, but now it was feeling numb. I felt helpless. About 15 minutes passed, and that is my best estimate. It could have been longer. My voice was getting hoarse through all my screaming and shouting. More cars passed, and still no one stopped. I was beyond scared. I was, I guess, hopeless. But then I heard someone shouting and coming towards our car. Miraculously, two guys who I can only assume were out on a hike in the neighboring mountain area came rushing over. They were like my guardian angels that day, those middle-aged hikers. They called for an ambulance and waited with us. Although my mother was bleeding profusely, her wounds were not life-threatening. She needed stitches, though. My sister got away with only needing a couple of stitches, too, but she was really bruised and had lots of minor cuts. I thought that I was going to lose my leg, but it wasn't that bad. It was just fractured. Grandma, however, did not make it. She suffered a collapsed skull as a result of the crash. The car that crashed into us belonged to an old couple. I still remember what the old man looked like. He had a really red face, and it looked as if he'd been drinking or something. I saw him at the closest hospital we ended up going to. He nodded at us when I saw him and said something like, "Ah, you guys, you made it. I guess that means you're all good. That's great." Just like the passers-by on the highway, his interest in the damage he caused us was minimal. I learned something horrible about people that day. Indifference can be truly chilling.
I used to go to after-school lessons. My parents paid for me to further my education when I was younger. I didn't like it at the time, but I guess that it has paid off, because I actually do pretty well for myself these days. Better than most, actually. I come from a countryside background. I'm not a farm kid or anything like that, quite the opposite. Anyways, I went to these after-school lessons when I was in high school. After class, some friends and I would play around on the streets and the neighboring fields and forests on the way home. Our high school was along the walk home, and there was this city hall building that had a big forest behind it. It was perfect for us kids to play around in. I have many fond memories of that place. Anyways, one dark evening after our after-school class, I was with some of my friends walking home, and we ran into some kid from our class at regular school. This kid, he was so dumb. Everyone made fun of him, and somehow he was trying to walk home with us. The annoying thing at the time was the fact that he recognized me from some of our shared classes at school, so he felt confident enough to run up and join us. I was not that happy to have him walk home with my actual friends, and it wasn't long before they realized that he was just not our kind of people. Eventually, my friends began to bully him. Someone managed to get his school bag from him, and we were throwing it around like an American football. Then someone grabbed his hat. It was summer. It had been pretty hot, but it was dark out now. Anyway, someone got his hat, and they did this amazing discus kind of frisbee throw and managed to make it land on a tree limb near that forest behind City Hall that I mentioned earlier. I saw him the next day at school, but he didn't say anything. However, about the same time we saw him the night before, after our cram school extra lessons, he appeared again. It was like he had been waiting for us to make our walk home. He had this determined look on his face, and he approached us. Well, he stood in our way. And then he said, "I'm missing my pencil case. Please give it back." I gave him a hollow laugh in response. It was just a pencil case, who cares, right? Well, apparently this kid. I know, shocking. He could have just got his mum to get him a new one, but he decided to take things further. He seemed to think that one of us had stolen or hid his pencil case. "Hi, Jay here. From here on in, it only gets worse. Remember the theme. Humans are the worst. If you want to stay with me, you're welcome, but we're going back to the story." Well, he was clearly out of line, so we dragged him to the forest behind that city hall to teach him a lesson. We first started berating him, getting in his face for accusing us of stealing from a kid like him. Trust me, he had nothing we wanted. I don't know who punched him first, but someone did. Things really escalated at that point. We were all punching him after that. He wouldn't stop crying, so then someone made him strip. Then we forced his underpants into his mouth. We used to make bases out in the woods, so we took him into a really deep part of the woods. He tried to run a couple of times, but there were more of us than there was of him. We left a shovel in our base, and someone, actually maybe me, came up with an idea of burying him in the soil until it was only his neck that was exposed. We're talking about a mountainous area, so the soil was rocky in parts, but if you knew where to dig, then you could find a deep enough area full of soft soil. Here I am telling you that I'm not a farm or countryside boy, and then I come out with something like that. Now, you mustn't wonder why I'm keeping my identity secret. There was a ditch that we had created beneath a tree. We used to hang out there when it was too hot, as it was pretty cool that deep into the woods. Anyways, we had this dirt piled up on either sides of the ditch. So after we dug a few feet and made him stand there, all we had to do was push the dirt back in. The desired effect was achieved. We had that kid buried from the neck down. We had a bucket out there too, and it was full. It had rained recently for a couple of nights. So we dumped water all around him so that the soil would be compacted and it would be harder for him to move. He was crying, but we couldn't really hear him because we had stuffed his unders back in his mouth. Someone then came up with the idea of jabbing at the soil with the shovel close to his body to frighten him. We would just take a run up with the shovel and aim as close as we could to his body without hurting him, just to scare him. Anyway, everyone was getting closer and closer, and when it got to my turn, I thought that I would do my best to outdo my friends, but unfortunately I aimed a little too close. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound it made when that shovel in my hand connected with something underground. I mean, I felt really sick. I didn't know that a sensation like that could provoke a physical response like that. I mean, I almost threw up. Put yourself in my shoes. Imagine how that must have felt. And now imagine how it might feel to be on the receiving end of that. It's stomach turning. I threw the shovel. I was in a state of shock. It ended up hitting one of my friends in the chest. Pretty hard. And he got really annoyed. I thought that I would be on the receiving end of that anger, but no. He directed it at the kid buried up to his neck. He stormed over to him with his shovel in hand and he shoved it downwards towards the buried area of that kid's abdomen. He was writhing in agony. He spat out his underwear. Our next move was to make him stop crying and screaming. No one said a word. We just started shoveling. Dirt cascaded over his head and eventually he fell silent. And we left. I remember there was a big fuss because a student from our school went missing. Nowadays I can't remember all that much about it. I haven't talked with all the friends I had back in those days lately, but we never spoke about that kid after we buried him. There was some investigations conducted by police at our school, but our group were never under suspicion. We were all honor students. No one even bothered to ask us where we were at the time. We didn't raise any suspicions. I vividly remember hearing something about some kids at school saying he was playing with some other kids, so I don't know. They didn't even look at us. No one looked into our group, and there has been a heck of a lot of water under the bridge since those days. Around the time that I went to university, the area behind the city hall was bulldozed to create homes and parking lots. I was nervous that something might have come out at that point. You know, when they started digging the foundations, but miraculously nothing came of it. I've been working for a long time now, and I was reminded of those days when I saw my son digging in the garden. Friends from cram school all seemed fine. Nothing happened. I guess there are no gods out there who have sought to punish me. It's been interesting.